My name's Camille Cobb, and I'm a postdoc at Carnegie Mellon University in the Sci Security and Privacy Institute. And starting this fall, I'll join the faculty at the University of Illinois. In this talk, I'll discuss work that I did in conjunction with co-authors at Carnegie Mellon. Our work focuses on the privacy risks that incidental users of smart home devices may face and the tensions this can create with device owners. Smart home devices are everywhere, and they just continue to grow in popularity. We know from prior research and real-world events that these devices can have security and privacy issues. Overall, the majority of prior research in this space has concentrated on security and privacy risks to the owners of these devices and on solutions that would help address their needs. This is super important work, but there's more to this picture as well. That's because smart home devices don't only collect data about the person who purchased them, they also collect data about incidental users, that is, other people who interact with or even simply enter the physical vicinity of a device. For example, parents with nannies might be able to eavesdrop on them, and surveillance cameras like Amazon's Ring doorbell can have unwanted privacy implications for the neighbors of people who decide to install them. There's been some research in this space, but it's predominantly concentrated on specific scenarios, like the risks to nannies or to Airbnb guests. A CSEW paper from last year did take a broader view, and our work contributes to a similar space. However, our approach provides novel perspectives in several ways. First, whereas previous work started by identifying a handful of specific scenarios in which people might be incidental users, and then asked participants to reflect on these, we wanted to develop a more comprehensive understanding of the range of situations that we should consider. Second, whereas previous work asked people to imagine how they might feel as an incidental user in a particular situation, we wanted to know what they're really experiencing and to explore the dual perspectives of both incidental users and device owners. Our study delves into these issues that affect incidental users by asking, what experiences do people have as incidental users? What privacy concerns do they have? And what tensions exist between incidental users and device owners? And then we, along with participants in our study, tried to envision what solutions would potentially help address privacy risks that are encountered by incidental users. To answer these questions, we used a mixed methods approach. First, we conducted focus groups, which gave us a formative, ground-up understanding of the answers to these questions. We ran 5 in-person focus group sessions, which occurred before the pandemic started. This included a total of 21 participants. We recruited on local forums like Craigslist, local subreddits, and Nextdoor, and we were intentional in the wording of our recruitment ads to specify that actually owning smart home devices was not a prerequisite. These focus groups gave us rich qualitative insights into our research questions, and they also directly informed the design of a survey, which we deployed to 386 participants on Prolific who were demographically representative of US adults. All of these methods were approved by our institution's IRB, and participants were compensated. In this talk, I'll surface results from both parts of the study, but I'll do so primarily through the lens of the focus groups. And I'll spend a lot of time talking about the solutions that focus group participants envisioned, even though there are a lot more results in the paper about the other 3 questions as well. So again, one of the goals of our study was to get a sense of the range of experiences people have as incidental users. We asked people to describe times when they had other people in their house interacting with their smart home devices, or when they interacted with or noticed smart home devices that they didn't own. Participants in our study talked about their neighbors' surveillance cameras, in one case being caught off guard when a neighbor asked, "Hey, was that you walking around your house late last night?" And in another case, deriving benefit from their neighbor's camera because it helped them catch the person who had stolen a bike from their garage. They talked about watching child caregivers on nanny cams. In one case, a participant told a story about how they saw the caregiver through the nanny cam and actually talked to them to tell them they thought maybe they were rocking their baby a little too hard. Many described feeling baffled by unfamiliar smart home devices when visiting friends or family or staying in short-term rentals. And participants who lived with roommates also talked about devices that they lived with but didn't own. By and large, the specific ways in which people had interacted with smart home devices as incidental users weren't new, but now we had confidence that we weren't missing anything because we relied on people themselves to tell us what was of concern. Additionally, our approach sometimes did help us broaden some of these categories. For example, beyond just nannies, participants discussed other job-related reasons that someone might be an incidental user. For example, babysitters might not have the exact same experiences as nannies, and we also heard from delivery workers, pet sitters, and about people doing construction work at participants' homes. So in surveys, we asked people about their experiences in each of these 5 situations, and we found that 91% of survey participants had been incidental users. You can read more in the paper about the prevalence of each of these types of situations. In most focus group sessions, privacy concerns arose naturally in the discussion that followed our initial prompt, which was just to simply describe their experiences. This reinforces that privacy-related thoughts were very salient in this context and important to address. In these sessions, participants described concerns from the perspectives of both device owners and incidental users. For example, as device owners, people pointed out that someone could do things like come over to your house and ask your Echo device, "Hey, what's on my calendar tomorrow?" which might reveal private information. Although our aim was primarily to study privacy concerns that incidental users had, rather than concerns that device owners have about incidental users, it's useful to understand that these coexist, because as I'll discuss in just a bit, some solutions could simultaneously address both types of concerns. Concerns also came up in the context of discussing benefits of smart home devices. Even when people had privacy concerns, they were frequently excited about the potential usefulness of smart home devices. From the perspective of incidental users, participants described concerns related to governments, advertisers, and device manufacturers, and even the device owners themselves. As with a lot of privacy-focused work, they often didn't have specific threats or harms in mind, but instead expressed a general feeling of unease. Like one participant had been a delivery driver, and he said that sometimes when he delivered packages to people's houses who had surveillance cameras, they would ask him to look directly at the camera so that they'd have a view of his face before they would let him inside to finish his delivery. And even though he understood why homeowners might ask him to do this, he said that it made him feel kind of creeped out. Some participants described factors that might affect their degree of concern, like the location of devices, whether it's inside or outside. Maybe specific rooms might feel less okay than others, for example, bathrooms or bedrooms where people might be sleeping, especially if they're staying overnight. The relationship people have with device owners might make a difference, and how often or how long they're spending at the home. Are they there overnight sleeping, or are they there for just a short time? Do these visits occur over a long period of time in their life or just in a short window? And then also, they talked about the impact of whether the device owner was also present while they were there. So, for example, pet sitters might often be at the home when device owners are not present, but usually when you're visiting a friend or family member, they're around. And they saw some devices as more concerning than others. So issues related to cameras and voice assistants were discussed most frequently and enthusiastically during the focus groups, though other types of devices came up as well. And we took this into account in our survey design by asking specifically about cameras and voice assistants and grouping other types of devices into two broad categories of smart door locks, thermostats, smart lights, and smart plugs, and appliances, robot vacuums, and other kinds of smart home devices. So since these were focus groups, we got a list of concerns and a sense of the factors that might affect concern, but it's also important to know which ones are stronger or weaker and which ones occur more often or less often. And that's not an answer we could get from the focus groups, but it is an answer we designed the survey to provide. In our survey, we asked participants how they felt about the privacy utility trade-offs for a certain type of device in a particular situation. So across all device types and situations, for about half of the combinations, participants indicated appreciation, but they disliked devices' presence 20% of the time. If you're interested in particular combinations of devices and settings, we have results for that in the paper. For now, I'll just mention that participants tended to dislike cameras and voice assistants more than other types of devices, and they seemed especially uncomfortable about cameras and short-term rentals, which over half of participants said they disliked. Our analysis showed that when a participant had actually experienced a scenario, rather than just imagining themselves seeing that type of device in that situation, they were more likely to be appreciative of the device. While it's possible that this pattern is due to people avoiding situations that they anticipated would make them uncomfortable, this difference speaks to the importance of understanding people's perspectives on situations they've actually experienced, in addition to understanding how they would imagine themselves feeling if the situation were to occur. We also found that people who own devices themselves were more likely to appreciate devices' presence when they encountered them as incidental users. In some sense, it's unsurprising that people who decide to buy devices themselves are more comfortable with smart home devices in general. But based on focus group discussions, it might be more complex than this. For example, considering the privacy risk utility balance, it's hard to get utility out of a device that you don't know how to use. So people who own devices themselves might therefore know how to use and therefore derive benefits from devices when they encounter them outside of their own home, which could help tip the balance toward utility and away from privacy concern. Similarly, people may feel less concerned about privacy if they have a better understanding of what the device is and is not capable of collecting, which a device owner might be more likely to already know about because they own the device themselves. These differences in reactions of device owners and non-owners start to speak to the tensions that may arise. Getting a better understanding of these tensions can help us determine, are these fundamental differences, or is it just due to misunderstandings that could potentially be addressed more easily, for example, through conversation? Because participants in focus groups had a mix of experiences with and as incidental users, both perspectives were present in these discussions. We observed disagreeing views between participants, but many participants were also self-aware that their preferences as a device owner were sometimes in conflict with their preferences as an incidental user. In the survey, we explored these tensions by asking participants whether they would be willing to move or relocate a device if they found out it was making someone else uncomfortable. We asked about them being willing to move the devices for a neighbor, a friend or family member who was visiting, a person living with them, or a person working in their home. Surprisingly, 90% of participants were willing to make these accommodations in at least some cases, but this willingness was often conditional. Only 48% of participants were willing to move or relocate devices for someone who was working in their home. People who were more comfortable with devices themselves were also less likely to be willing to accommodate others. Some survey participants gave free response answers to explain how they would determine whether to move or relocate a device that was making someone else uncomfortable. They often noted that they would want a specific reason, saying things like, I would have to evaluate their objections, or it depends on what the reason was. My cousin who's paranoid about Big Brother listening in, no, we would not turn it off. As I said before, many people feel uncomfortable about the presence of smart home devices, even if they can't always convey a clear reason for this discomfort. And so it might actually mean that people who are uncomfortable have a hard time getting their preferences met by device owners. So we asked focus group participants to draw pictures of their ideas for addressing the privacy concerns that were brought up. It's useful and interesting to get ideas for solutions directly from participants, since they're experts in their own experience. And often, solutions that people come up with can help us better understand the characteristics that are most important for solutions that we eventually implement. I'll show you a couple of pictures in a minute, but a few themes that showed up were that as incidental users, many participants wanted to be informed about the presence, location, or data collection capabilities of devices they encountered, and they wanted to have a chance to give consent for data collection, or not. They proposed solutions that could be implemented now with existing devices or requiring only a conversation. And in some cases, they said they already did some of these things. And they also proposed approaches that would require new technology designs. The envisioned solutions sometimes put the onus for addressing privacy risks on device owners, and other times gave that power and responsibility to incidental users or technology creators. First, I'll show a few drawings of solutions that would involve actions by the device owner. One participant felt that devices should only be placed in clearly visible locations so that an incidental user would know that the devices are there. A common suggestion was for device owners to put up signs in or outside of their homes to let passerby and visitors know that there might be a device around that could record data about them when they're in this location. And people talked about this being pretty similar to when you have a surveillance system in your home and put a decal in your front window. In this drawing, we see a conversation that's happening between the device owner and a babysitter. In this case, it's initiated by the device owner. Although the device owner is telling the babysitter that they have a nanny cam somewhere, they don't say where it is. And in this drawing, it's hidden inside of a teddy bear toy. In some sessions, participants suggested that there may be situations in which it's appropriate for device owners to hide devices in order for the devices to achieve their desired goals. In this case, a participant is showing how you could let someone know that there's a device present, even if you don't tell them exactly where it is. Some participants noted the limitations of solutions that required action from device owners, and they felt that incidental users should be empowered to take action themselves. In both surveys and focus groups, many participants said that they would just unplug devices they saw if they were making them uncomfortable. And several participants said that they would proactively look for devices whenever they enter a new space. If they know that a device is around, then incidental users can at least adapt their behavior, for example, by avoiding sensitive topics of conversation in the vicinity of a voice assistant. In this drawing, we can see someone who's proactively looking for voice assistant devices by entering a space and immediately calling out wake words for the most popular voice assistants. And if they hear a response, then they know they're potentially being listened to. Some solutions involved redesigns of the devices themselves. For example, These drawings show smart cameras and voice assistants that beep or speak to let someone know that they're there. Participants pointed out that this could get annoying, so maybe the devices should detect new people entering the space and only vocalize if the person would not already reasonably know that the device is there. We saw several variations of privacy modes, including buttons to stop data collection, apps that would maybe like convey an incidental user's preferred privacy settings to the devices they encounter, and then alter privacy configurations to suit the preferences in the context of a device owner's willingness to accommodate those settings, and then other mechanisms to partially or temporarily disable data collection. The idea of voice prints came up repeatedly across several sessions, possibly because commodity voice assistants are already integrating similar features. Participants envisioned that voice assistants could help with both the device owners and incidental users' risks. They could be set such that voice data is not collected without a person's consent, and they could also be set such that unauthorized users wouldn't be able to trigger certain voice commands. Similarly, but for cameras, several participants imagined software that could automatically blur or censor the faces of people who didn't opt into data collection. To summarize, most people are incidental users. Even if people aren't worried about privacy in the majority of situations where they interact with other people's smart home devices, privacy concerns are still common. Device owners are often willing to accommodate incidental users, but in our paper, we argue that we should make it easier for incidental users to express when they're uncomfortable about a device, and that we should make it possible for device owners to collect less data about incidental users while still getting the main benefits they want from their devices. When prioritizing which solutions to implement, we should, of course, create solutions that address the needs of large numbers of people, but we should also factor in existing power dynamics and create solutions that are useful for incidental users who might currently find it especially difficult to achieve their privacy goals, for example, workers in homes where device owners might be unwilling to make accommodations for them. Thanks so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to having discussions with you about this work.